Yeah, but I used to think that the biggest challenge for Bitcoin was scalability. I talked about it all the time. I no longer think that's true. I think that by far the number one issue for Bitcoin is fungibility. And if Bitcoin doesn't deal with this issue, you are effectively going to have a bifurcated Bitcoin world where you have all of this money that comes from Bitcoin, that comes from China, places that FinCEN doesn't like, maybe Iran. It got touched by somebody inadvertently via an unwhitelisted address 6 transactions back, which, by the way, happens with paper money all the time. It's untraceable. Okay. With drugs and other things. Just do a forensic analysis on the average paper money. It's unbelievable. Fecal matter, drugs, and all kinds of other shit. But you can trace Bitcoin today because it's not truly fungible yet. Meaning, one Bitcoin is not really one Bitcoin in terms of its history. If we don't address, we meaning the technical community, doesn't address this fungibility problem, in my humble opinion, it's going to get really bad. And you're going to have different UTXOs actually worth different amounts of money in dollars. UTXOs basically being the outputs that haven't been spent that can trace their history in a quote unquote clean way from the government's perspective versus a dirty way, which, by the way, is just some arbitrary distinction that some overseer made up, which is completely orthogonal to the idea of a decentralized currency with no off switch. The only way that I can see to stop this problem from happening is to integrate true fungibility into Bitcoin. And once you've done that, they have nothing to say about it.
Well, this is what the Monero guys have been talking about quite a bit. If you follow their conversation,
of course,
and look, whatever people say about altcoins, Monero is one that's kind of interesting. There are people who are maxis who actually don't mind Monero, but the Monero argument on fungibility is an important one.
Right. This is why I'm a proponent of altcoin, though. Is not because I believe any of these coins are going to exist 20 years from now. I have no idea. Maybe they're all going to be dead. But they're showing us from a technology perspective what can work in a way that's lower risk for what matters. And what matters ultimately is Bitcoin. And so if we can learn on someone else's dime that you can create a fungible token like a Monero over 15 years and then move pieces of that tech or Litecoin integrates Mimblewimble in a way that we see that over many years works, that's fantastic, right? So we need to rethink some of this maximalism as it relates. You can't just test this stuff on a test net, right? You need to test stuff on a test net, but you also need the ability to test stuff in the real world in a way that is lower risk. And that's anyway. I don't want to make this about altcoins, but you get my point.
No. But the fungibility, the fungibility thing is important, right? And there are going to be people listening to this who don't know what fungibility is. They don't know why it's an issue. Why do technologies such as coin joins not solve this problem? Is it because they're still not fungible, and some places, some exchanges as such are blocking those coins because they can tell they've been coin joined? Is it because the technology itself is too difficult to use? Is there a way of bringing fungibility to Bitcoin natively in a way that people don't have to think about it?
Right. Well, first of all, let's take a step back. CoinJoin, the biggest issue with that service is you're trusting a third party that from many regulators' perspective is a licensed money service or a licensable money service business, right? Whether you agree with that or not, that's a problem. That's orthogonal to the idea of creating fungibility in the first place. Well, wait a minute. Fungibility in money shouldn't mean I have to go to a licensed money service business to create the damn fungibility in the first place. That's ridiculous. Okay. So it needs to be integrated at the layer 1 protocol level. Otherwise, some government is going to figure out how to inject themselves into that process of creating fungibility in the first place, as opposed to making it a core tenet of the protocol. But if you want to take a step back and explain what fungibility means in very simple terms, think about it this way. If Peter has $1, Simon has $1, and I have $1, and we start trading them amongst each other, right? They all have serial numbers on them. But by and large, when you go to a store, and hand them the $1 for your latte, well, probably $10 for a latte, they don't look at the serial numbers to basically go look at a list to say, is this a good dollar or a bad dollar? Okay. We can do that easily with crypto so that you can trace where that Bitcoin came from to decide if it's a good Bitcoin or a bad Bitcoin. And FinCEN, which is our overseer in the United States from Treasury Department, which basically maintains the list of bad actors, countries you can't do business with, terrorists, basically has now created a blacklist of crypto addresses that you have to report transactions from, right? And potentially can't even deal with because they're associated, in their opinion, with illicit activity. There's been no trial, no publicly published evidence, to my knowledge, that they are bad. We simply have to accept from FinCEN's perspective that they're bad. Otherwise, we can't be in business if you're a custodian. And so they don't do the same with serial numbers for paper money, to my knowledge. Okay, if they did, Starbucks would be out of business because it would be completely untenable to sit there while there's 75 people in line to process the serial number for every single dollar bill that was coming through the store. Right, but they put that onus on us in crypto land when we move cryptocurrencies around. The only way to deal with this is to make it impossible to track this at the Bitcoin address level, and just make it so that you cannot tell the difference between your Satoshi and my Satoshi.
How big an engineering problem is this? Have you discussed this with any core developers? I don't hear it talked about a lot. I hear it talked a lot about by the Monero guys, but I don't hear it talked a lot about with the Bitcoin people. Like, you've made the biggest case for it I think I've ever had in any of my interviews. Why is this not an issue at the moment?
Look, I would strongly encourage you to have Charlie Lee back on the show and get into the Mimblewimble extension block that they've implemented that enhances scaling and privacy for Litecoin, and why he's so bullish on it, and why he thinks it needs to potentially make its way into Bitcoin. I don't think, and again, I have a degree in computer science, but I'm a little outdated on this. I have read their paper. I think I understand it. I don't think it addresses fungibility the way you could with like Monero, but it's a more scalable solution. Monero, the challenge with Monero is you pay a huge price in scalability, right? And so it's like everything else in a decentralized system. There's trade-offs upon trade-offs upon trade-offs. And so, right, we need to maintain security, not take 10 steps backwards in terms of scalability, but definitely solve this fungibility problem. Mimblewimble seems to be a reasonable trade-off to creating scalable privacy. And I would strongly encourage you to have Charlie back on the show, maybe with a core dev at the same time, to kind of go back and forth on this in a way that people can understand. Charlie's pretty good at putting things in a way that the average person can also understand.
Well, Charlie's an engineer as well. So yeah, I'll definitely take a look at it. If I think it's important and useful, for sure. Simon, do you have anything to add on this fungibility thing before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing is that the two-tiered Bitcoin price has existed for a long time already. So in 2013, I used to operate a mining farm in Iceland. And we used to sell virgin Bitcoins to financial institutions at a huge premium because they needed to know that they came directly from the mining rig, from a miner that had the correct paperwork and the correct regulated structure, so that it could meet their compliance requirements in order to make it into their financial institution. And so they're willing to pay a huge premium for that. Now, the challenge with the protocol level solutions, firstly, I do think they're working on it. It's been a long debate in Bitcoin, and there's lots of solutions being proposed. So I think it is an area that lots of developers are really interested in looking at. But the solutions of at the protocol level, the challenge is so, as a regulated financial institution, we have to attach a risk score to every transaction that comes in. And every bank and financial institution and exchange, if they're not doing it already, has to do the same thing. And so when an address comes from a certain source, i.e. it went through some kind of mixing service, then it has to have a higher risk score. And so therefore, this whole fungibility thing is truly the crux of the future. Now, it's a double-edged sword as well, because, my biggest challenge with Monero has always been. It's a brilliant utility token, but I've always thought that every exchange is just not going to be able to make a listing in it in the future. So I've always thought it won't have a price in the future other than the black market. And this really brings into the second solution, which, as much as the Bitcoin maximalists may hate the topic, but it is the real way to take the policing of the middleman out of the equation, is to take the middleman out of the equation. And that's why it's just been amazing to watch these decentralized exchanges where you don't have to have the police in the middle. And it brings back law enforcement, where they have to do the duty of responsibility to track crime. And you simply trade peer-to-peer. So for me, getting Bitcoin to the point where it can catch up with a lot of the innovation that's happening in the Ethereum ecosystem is, and I'm more than happy to be patient. I'm happy for Ethereum to do all the experimentation, and I know that Bitcoin was never optimized for it. But we do need these solutions in the future, because it is the fact that the middle person has to be there, that it creates this burden of responsibility to the middle person. And they go to prison if they get it wrong. Being a CEO, Bill will say, if you're being a CEO of a regulated institution is a bit of a dangerous game. You have to take this responsibility very seriously, fines, all sorts of stuff. So it is the crux of the conversation, but why the decentralized stuff is so important, to have financial products where you can just operate peer-to-peer and take the need for that financial institution out in the middle.
That's right. I'll also say, look, my team doesn't like it when I come on shows like this and talk about, and I rail against choke points and the travel rule and certain aspects of money service business regulation. And at the end of the day, I care about their opinion on this, but I love America from the perspective of land of the free, home of the brave, send us your poor, tire you're hungry. That's the America I love. I don't like Orwellian America, 1984 America. And I'll fight for that, even if it means I become a pariah within, the regulatory community, which maybe I am. I don't know. I don't really care. Our customers don't care, for sure. We're still going to obey the laws, come hell or high water. But someone has to make people aware of the fact that the original version of Bitcoin, as it was intended, created holes that have now created big long-term problems for its viability as long as the Eurodollar system exists. If that system doesn't exist, because fungibility is a two-pronged problem from a certain perspective, right? If the dollar goes away and everything's Bitcoin, part of the problem goes away. Because the regulators may have less of a role to play, because in theory, everybody can just hold their own Bitcoin. But as long as you have a on and off rail based system, because you have to do even ephemeral transactions at some point, when the dollar's on its deathbed and we use it for ephemeral transactions, you're still going to have to come in and out of the dollar. And those regulators will have a role to play in that. And so as long as they do, we're going to have this fungibility problem. And the banks are going to be around for a long time still. So it behooves us to deal with this fungibility problem.
I definitely will have to. I would definitely have to go into that a bit further and get. I'll talk to Charlie and I'll talk to someone on the core dev team and see where we're at with that. I guess the thing is that we are moving to this more. I'm going to say Bitcoin / crypto based financial world. I know some people get triggered by me saying crypto, but like I can see scenarios where I've said it. There's certain scenarios where I would definitely use Monero over Bitcoin. I could tell you the type of transaction I would. And I also see like a bit of a use case for stable coins. I forget all the other stuff. I'm not really interested in it. But we are moving to this kind of new financial system where we actually don't need the banks. We talked about this before, Bill. I mean,